Talking Transport, the podcast from the Transport Network.
We're only a few weeks away from the next ITS World Congress as the event moves to the Asia-Pacific region and Singapore for 2019. And this is Talking Transport, looking ahead to the event.
Coming up in today's edition,
we talk detection systems.
There's a recognition that there's big savings to be made in the installation and then also the longevity of the integrity of the road surface.
Traffic management.
This is a central integration platform of different software modules, and the visitors will see how powerful this platform is in the end to manage the traffic.
And modelling.
The idea is to use actually that technology that we have today to look also in real time what is the consequences.
Plus why heading to the Congress saves money.
He has to travel maybe 10 times more than going only to Singapore and see all the relevant people that it will be important for him to meet.
We'll also have our guide to the event and venue on Talking Transport.
Talking Transport, sponsored by AGD Systems, Cohda Wireless, HERE, Jenoptik, PTV Group, Swarco and WSP.
So welcome to this first preview podcast ahead of the ITS World Congress 2019 in Singapore. Loads of interesting stuff to talk about, and we'll have the first of our guides to Singapore on today's programme. But I'll also introduce you to my guest on every single one of the podcasts through the World Congress, which is Professor Eric Sampson, one of the dwindling number of people who has been to every single ITS World Congress since Paris in 1994. Eric, you've been on these podcasts before. For those who haven't heard, you kind of are my trusted guide as, among other things, you're the chief rapporteur for the World Congress. So you've been working through the papers, and during the podcast we'll be talking about some of the key must-attend sessions within the event. But first of all, just give me an idea from your visits to Singapore how the issues facing Singapore are reflected in the Congress programme and what we're going to see in the event.
I first went to Singapore in 1998 and then went back last year for the planning committee, and frankly got quite a shock because the city has changed out of all recognition. It's a very interesting place, Singapore. It's very small. You don't realise how small it is till you look at the map. The road space takes up 12% of Singapore, which is a lot. It's 10 times as much as a typical European country. It's quite a wealthy place. It's very highly educated, and it's got a government that is very sensible and is quite willing to try things, and if they don't work, they'll stop them. And you can see government policy reflected in the Congress. The top level theme is smart mobility, empowering cities. And this is all about doing better for cities. There's 8 themes. I'll not go into them in detail. But what you will see in the Congress is a very strong emphasis on public transport. Because of the labour shortages in Singapore, they're looking at driverless vehicles for a different reason to a lot of places. Not showing off technology and what can be done, but simply they need driverless vehicles because they can't recruit drivers. Very strong emphasis on youth. Singapore, very highly educated country. There's an 8-day programme, the Youth Development Programme, running in parallel with the Congress, starting right at the beginning, and a lot of concessions for people under 25. And Singapore is a world port. It's a huge, very energetic port. That's also reflected in the Congress. We've got stronger freight and logistics sessions than I can remember from anywhere. So, in a funny way, this may not be a very good analogy, but I see Singapore as a bit like a teaching hospital. Any problem that a European city's got, Singapore's got it. You go to the Singapore World Congress and you'll come across all of them in one place under the same roof.
Professor Eric Sampson will be our trusted guide to the event and some of the sessions that are taking place and so forth. And I think in a nutshell, he's explained to us why we need to be in Singapore this year. So if you haven't booked your ticket, you haven't booked your flight and your hotel, there's still time. Get there. We're going to learn an awful lot at the Singapore Congress. We'll talk more about what Singapore is like as a destination later on in the podcast. Eric, we'll talk again next time.
Thanks, Paul.
Talking Transport, looking ahead to the ITS World Congress in Singapore.
So let's catch up with one of the sponsors of our podcasts for Singapore, and that's AGD Systems. And I'm really pleased to be joined by Sean Hammond, who's Sales and Marketing Manager in the UK, and Stuart Douglas, who's the MD of the Australian business. And by the wonders of modern technology, we have both of them on the line now. So first of all, Stuart, what are you looking forward to in Singapore?
We're looking for exposure into the Asian market and bringing the AGD product range to a new market, which we haven't had a lot of exposure in. We've had some small entries into different areas, but what we're looking at is developing our product range and bring it to that market. We're very excited with the new range of products that are coming onto the market with the highway monitoring radar, the new pedestrian detection systems. And we think that bringing these to the Asian market will improve the efficiency and the use of the motorway systems and help with pedestrian safety around their intersections, which is a major safety issue in Asia with pedestrian fatalities and accidents.
You mentioned that you wanted to break further into the Far Eastern market, but I understand that you've done quite well in Malaysia, and you've actually got some of your 343 highways monitoring radar actually installed there.
That's correct, Paul. We've managed to get several units on 3 different highways, and that's been a recent installation, and we're just looking forward to receiving the data coming back to have a look at how they're performing in that environment.
Sean, when I first came across the company, I think back in about 2012, it was all about vehicle monitoring at intersections, but you've made leaps and bounds in the quality of your pedestrian and as well cycling schemes, haven't you?
Yes, Paul. It's been quite a steep curve of development, and the componentry within all of that has come up to a level where the monitoring side of things is so much more accurate. The element that Stuart alluded to with regard to safety has become more and more paramount. The ease of setup of these items, whether it be what we had before as Bluetooth and now Wi-Fi, enables the installation engineers to be safe by the roadside, so that they don't actually have to be up high and they don't actually have to be by the roadsides to effectively set these things up. So the whole process of development is very fast, but at the same time we're seeing some really nice advantages coming out of these.
So how does the IP addressable device actually improve the setup and the running of the product?
The GUI that we have designed within the sensors is so user-friendly that once you have plugged in that IP address to your tablet or your smartphone, the interface is so user-friendly that once you've set out the parameters of either the on-crossing radar or the sensor that is at the curbside, you can really basically make it as flexible as you want.
Stuart, what can we look forward to seeing on your stand, and what else you will be doing and taking part actually at the Congress in Singapore?
We'll be focusing on the pedestrian safety with 326, which is to be released soon, and the 645 and the 641, as presenting that as a package for pedestrian safety. And then also we'll be presenting the 343 highway monitoring radar with a view of improving the occupancy and the monitoring of the highway systems.
And finally, Sean, I presume that even though we're talking about the Asia-Pacific markets specifically in this chat, the fact that you're heading over to Singapore means that you're looking forward to meeting delegates from all around the world and explaining what you can do anywhere, basically.
The requirement of monitoring major roads is, we're finding that the clients are worldwide. We are looking at the relatively easy hits, to be honest with you, where there are new developments or very little monitoring systems in those areas, as Stuart alluded to, with Malaysia, Thailand is another area, and we'll be travelling out to Chile to carry out the same kind of demonstrations and presentations to 5 companies out there. Lots of opportunities. So yeah, globally it's something that is so versatile and flexible. Seems to be a real appetite for it.
Can I just add on to that, Paul, that at the ITS conference in Melbourne I just attended, there's a real appetite for above ground detection. The road surface isn't being tampered with or damaged by the installation of a loop-based system. And there's a recognition that there's big savings to be made in the installation and then also the longevity of the integrity of the road surface.
So that's Stuart Douglas, the MD of AGD Systems in Australia, and you've also heard from Sean Hammond, Sales and Marketing Manager of the UK business. AGD Systems is one of the sponsors of Talking Transport in Singapore, and we'll be talking to them more when we're actually at the ITS World Congress. But for now, Sean and Stuart, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
This is Talking Transport with Paul Hutton.
This wouldn't be a Talking Transport podcast if I didn't talk to one of our longest supporters of these programmes from around the world, that is Swarco, and specifically my friend Richard Neumann, who is Head of Communications and Marketing at the Swarco Group and is a stalwart of ITS World Congresses around the world. Richard, this time actually you're taking a break from the trip to the World Congress, but Swarco certainly aren't. What can we look forward to seeing from Swarco in Singapore?
Yes, hello, Paul. Good to talk to you again. It's true, I will not be there in person this time, but Swarco will, of course, attend the 26th ITS World Congress in Singapore. We will be present on the Austrian Pavilion, which is stand number 93. We will, of course, focus on the capabilities of Swarco with regard to urban traffic management. You know that Swarco is a solution provider, and we are presenting in Singapore our new urban mobility platform, which is called Swarco My City. And this is a central integration platform of different software modules, and the visitors will see how powerful this platform is in the end to manage the traffic in cities.
And how important is the Asia-Pacific region to Swarco? Because I remember, for example, 3 years ago, you had a sizable stand in Melbourne and lots of business in Australia. How does that compare to Asia-Pacific, Singapore and that region?
Australia is quite a stronghold for Swarco because we are successfully exporting not only LED traffic lights, but also reflective glass beads to the continent down under. In other Asian or Far East countries like Japan, Thailand or Malaysia, Swarco is also present already with our road marking systems business, which means that we are exporting our glass beads, which serve as retro reflectors for the nighttime visibility of road markings. But nevertheless, Swarco wants to be recognized as a global solution provider, and we are constantly developing also new countries. And Asia Pacific for sure is a promising region for us, and the ITS World Congress will help us to assess the market situation there a bit more in depth.
And I guess that's one of the points when we're talking to people around the world thinking about going to the World Congress. Maybe they're still deciding. It's very much, it is a world congress, isn't it? It's not just an Asia-Pacific show that some people choose to go to. The business is done in world congresses wherever, which I guess is why Swarco is such a strong supporter of them.
The World Congresses really have a worldwide scope, gathering several thousand attendees. So it's important for us to show our face, to create brand awareness of Swarco also in the Asian market. Yeah.
It's not just a demonstration of what Swarco does. One of the things I notice when I've been at World Congresses, goodness, we talk about Melbourne, we talk about Montreal, I remember us talking, and Copenhagen, as well as, of course, your home Congress you had back in 2012 in Vienna. You're not always on the stand, Richard. You and your colleagues are spending quite a lot of time looking around the rest of the Congress and actually picking up ideas and learning. So it's not just a sales tool, it's a learning tool as well.
Yes, it's a very important factor, the networking among the exhibitors themselves. It's a possibility and an opportunity to see what the competition is doing, what other companies have in mind, where the trends go. And for us, it's important not to be there only as an exhibitor, but we are usually also contributing to the conferences with papers, with presentations. We take part in panel discussions and things like that. So that's an important marketing tool in the end for Swarco.
Richard Neumann is my friend from Swarco, and he's in charge of all the company's marketing and communications. One thing I'll mention before Richard goes, if you scroll back on previous Talking Transport podcasts, and in fact I'll put a link on the blurb about this, fascinating 25-minute chat that Richard and I had earlier on in the year at Swarco Traffic World at the company's headquarters in Wattens near Innsbruck. We found out all about the 50-year history of Swarco and looked towards some of the future of the company. If you haven't heard that yet, well worth listening to a 25-minute extended interview with Richard on Talking Transport. So as I say, there's a link on the blurb about that. Richard, I'm sorry I'm not going to see you in Singapore, but enjoy not having the long haul flight out there and back, and no doubt we will catch up in another exhibition centre somewhere in the world really soon.
Thank you very much, Paul. I look forward to meeting you again on one of the fairgrounds around the globe soon. Thank you.
Talking Transport, brought to you thanks to WSP, Swarco, PTV Group, Jenoptik, here, Cohda Wireless and AGD Systems.
Our next guest on Talking Transport is a fascinating chap called Paolo Humanis. Now, I think I travel a lot with my work, but Paolo is somebody who seems to define living out of a suitcase. He is PTV Group's Vice President of Business Development and New Mobility, and boy, is the guy mobile himself. Paolo, whereabouts in the world are you that we're speaking today?
So today I'm actually from my office in Karlsruhe in Germany.
Wow, do your staff recognise who you are?
Yeah, they do.
Okay. And of course we've got Singapore coming up, which you're going to be at. I remember 3 years ago when we looked forward to the last ITS World Congress in the Asia Pacific region, we talked about looking ahead to Melbourne. 3 years later, into a really, really busy city. What are you looking forward to talking about when you get to Singapore?
Well, Singapore is always a reference in terms of innovation and new thinking in terms of mobility because of the restrictions that they have geographically. And it highlights how important technology can play in helping the mobility of a city. So for me, it will be quite interesting to see what is new, what is the industry trying to do from a technology point of view, where we're becoming more and more digitized, and all these new forms of mobility, being traditional mobility, new mobility, and micromobility, are now starting to really work together. And technology is playing a very important role in bringing all that together. So I'm really looking forward in Singapore to see what people are doing and what is the currently thinking in terms of the ecosystem. So that's really what I'm looking forward to the most.
Now, I ran an article in an issue of Smart Highways a while ago, written by your colleague here in the UK, Devrim Kara, about a product called Optima, which kind of uses real-time traffic information and transport modelling to predict, in effect, traffic jams before they happen, and then work out mitigation to actually say, if we don't do anything in 30 minutes there's going to be a jam, but if we do this and this, we can actually reduce the impact before it even happens. Sounds like Singapore, in such a busy city, in such a small area, would be the sort of place that this would be perfect for.
Yes, and that's exactly where we are at the moment, and that's why it's so important. And you have to think, and that's why I said it's so exciting, not only on the traditional traffic, but also in terms of public transport, and also in terms of micromobility, and how those can actually work together to complement each other. It's about not only about looking at the future in terms of traffic and efficiency, but also in terms of environmental performance, energetic performance. More and more we're talking about electric mobility, and also about road safety. How do we make sure that things are better? And the idea is exactly to try to enable a city like Singapore to try to understand what is the current situation, what will happen, and what is the best strategy to take it forward, not only with the private car, because that tends to be traditionally the source of problems in most of our cities, but also what happens with public transport. Can we come up with alternative strategies to help the movement of the city with regards to public transport, or now more and more with micromobility, and of course taking consideration the environmental performance, and as I said, also the energetic performance. Does it make sense that we start storing more energy because it's a peak is coming and we need to have the batteries full for electric bikes, this electric scooters, and so on? So that's exactly where we are moving towards. And in Singapore, during the ITS, we want to showcase the state of the art where we are at the moment in terms of these solutions for cities.
Now, when I did my maths degree 20 odd years ago, I wasn't particularly good at it, hence why I ended up being a journalist. But I remember one of my favourite courses was about optimisation and operational research, which of course encompassed modelling. How on earth do you start to model something as complex as a city with people travelling on so many different modes? You've got so many variables there that surely the slightest difference could make chaotic results and end up with garbage. So how can you be so confident that modelling so many different variables comes out with a reliable answer?
Yeah, so you have to understand the background is the models that we developed, they are 40 years old. So we have been doing this for 40 years. We're celebrating our 40th anniversary this year. And we have a lot of experience in this type of things. Over the last few years, the advent of big data made it easier for us to have a number of data collection and data points. And that's what makes traffic and cities so exciting. Is it's not, of course, it's not an easy task to model and try to understand everything, and it requires a lot of effort. But that effort is required in order to justify, for instance, investment decisions, and what is the impact of infrastructure, and how do we better understand what is the benefit or disbenefits of schemes. And the idea is to use actually that technology that we have today to look also in real time what is the consequences, because it's never easy to find a particular situation where it's always the same if you just want to look at historical data. Of course it can help, but this is the idea, is really try to understand the ecosystem as a whole, and it becomes really easy with the model that most cities develop, and as I said, that we've been developing for such a long time. Yes, there is a lot of trying to understand, but there's also a lot of calibration and validation of the results.
Paolo, always fascinating to talk to you. One of the sort of people that I could talk to for hours and hours about this sort of thing. So let's catch up and continue the conversation on your stand in Singapore, and we'll meet up with some of the visitors as well and find out what they're finding out about PTV. Yeah. Paolo Humanis is Vice President of Business Development and New Mobility at the world's oldest modelling firm, our sponsors on Talking Transport, PTV Group, and we'll talk to them again, as I say, in Singapore. Paolo, for the moment, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
You're listening to Talking Transport from Smart Highways magazine. We'll have daily programmes from Singapore looking at the must-see exhibits, must-attend sessions and must-try demonstrations through the week. I'm Paul Hutton, and I've been reporting from ITS congresses from around the world for the best part of a decade now. Got to admit, there are worse ways to make a living. Keep listening for our guide to Singapore, which is on its way, but I ought to just mention that as well as our sponsors, our podcasts are also brought to you in association with the ITS Associations of Australia, Arab, America, South Africa and the UK, plus Urtico, ITS Europe. And it's Urtico we come to next. I caught up with the organisation's CFO and Congress Director Didier Gertemann to find out his organisation's involvement in this event.
Our aim is to bring as much as possible people from Europe. And we are doing quite well for the moment. We got the first numbers, and 20% of the total participants are coming from Europe for the moment. And we have also a huge delegation in the exhibition area. So yes, we are not as busy as we are when we organize in Europe the World Congress, but we are really supporting and promoting the event heavily.
This is really positive because sometimes you do get the feeling, don't you, at World Congresses, that it might be an ITS America Congress with a few others or an ITS European Congress with a few others. But as the years have gone on, the number of people coming from the different regions to the host region is growing. And I guess that's because the message is getting through to people that it is a World Congress and our mobility issues are worldwide.
Yes, that's perfectly true, yeah, and that's exactly how we are also communicating when we communicate about the Congress. It's not because it's in Singapore or Copenhagen or Los Angeles. It's really bring all together, all the stakeholders at one place to discuss the same issues that everybody has on mobility, smart mobility, digitalization of the transport and things like that. So it's really key for us to be able to bring our own country and our region to another region.
So what would you say to somebody who's maybe trying to get the budget to fly from maybe Europe or the United States? What could they say to whoever signs off the purchase order to convince them that it really is worth going to Singapore?
I think the first thing to say is that he will meet the right people at the right place. So it's not a question of the budget to go there, but it's a really important place to be there, because if he has to do it in Europe, he has to travel maybe 10 times more than going only to Singapore and see all the relevant people that it will be important for him to meet, to discuss and to find maybe new business.
Didier, I'm really looking forward to being there, looking forward to seeing the significant European contingent there as well. I'll see you in Singapore.
Yeah, see you.
So I'd like to round off this Talking Transport podcast by talking not about the World Congress itself, but about the location, the venue for it being the country of Singapore. And so I've been joined by the CEO and Dean of Newcastle University in the UK in Singapore. That's Professor Matt Bentley. Matt, thank you for joining me. And the first thing I'm going to point out is the rather loud noise of the air conditioning behind you, which, from what I understand reading the books and talking to people who've been to Singapore before, is kind of an essential in the place.
Thanks, Paul. Nice to be joining you. Air conditioning, you're absolutely right, is an essential for working in Singapore. Singapore is just under 1 degree north of the equator, so it's an equatorial climate, which is the same essentially every day of the year. Daytime temperatures something like 33, 34 degrees Celsius, nighttime temperatures down to about 28 degrees Celsius. So it's essential for a working climate to be able to come indoors and then work at a temperature which is probably about 24 degrees, which everybody says is too cold, and people find themselves putting sweaters on in order to keep their body at a reasonable temperature to cope with the air conditioning.
I also understand that the humidity is kind of off the scale compared to what we're used to. So, for example, you know, people in Europe and the US might end up somewhere like Las Vegas and it's a very dry heat. It's very much not a dry heat where you are.
That's very true. And obviously many people in Europe and the States are used to temperatures which might well be in the mid-30s. That's actually quite comfortable because of the low humidity. Humidity here varies between about 65 and 85%, and is commonly around 75% throughout the whole of the day. So one of the key things you have to remember in Singapore is walk slowly, otherwise you'll simply break into a really uncomfortable sweat. The humidity along with the temperature can make it a very unpleasant place to live. I actually love the climate in Singapore, and many other people do too.
And so what can we expect? We'll chat again ahead of the Congress in our second preview podcast, but just what can we expect of the place when it comes to the number of people and the buildings and the kind of way of getting around?
Well, Singapore, I believe, is like nowhere else. A lot of people have experience of some of the other great cities in Southeast Asia, Bangkok, for example, where there is a lot of noise, pollution, bustle, chaos which typifies some of the cities in the region. Singapore is completely different. I mean, it's a small island. Some people say it's not much bigger than the Isle of Wight in the UK, but it has 5.6 million people on it, so it's a very, very high population density. Some people dislike it not because of the climate, because they feel it is very well organised, very clean, very safe, and sometimes regard it as being somewhat sterile, which again is not the case when you scratch below the surface. But it is nonetheless a very efficiently run, very pleasant, very friendly and very safe place to be.
And we'll touch on the must-see places beyond the Congress Centre, but I just want to finish with, give me your recommendation for the one dish that somebody must eat during their time in Singapore.
Well, I guess most people would say a Singapore laksa. I mean, it's a regional dish. It's hot, it's spicy, and you find it all across Southeast Asia. Some people would say, well, Singapore noodles, but actually Singapore noodles is not a classic, but the laksa is a good dish for the region.
And washed down with a Singapore sling?
Well, I'd rather have a local tiger beer or something myself.
So I've heard that Singapore slings are a little sweet and an acquired taste, is what I've been told.
Yeah. And can be very expensive. Certain well-known hotels, for example, will set you back probably $45 for a Singapore sling, which is not an inconsiderable amount of money.
Right, yep, that's worth noting down when Mrs. Hutton joins me for the week in the at the Congress. Maybe I'll stick to the afternoon tea instead. And what about street food and things like that? Is it safe to eat? Because sometimes, you get the stories of people, say, going to India and eating the street food and, how can I put it, regretting it. I take it Singapore being very clean and very ordered, perfectly safe to eat?
Absolutely safe to eat. I mean, I eat it all the time. I've never had a problem in Singapore where I have in other places. The best known food centre is probably Maxwell Food Centre, which is not far from Chinatown, which has recently been refurbished. But you will find food centres which is often called hawker markets, hawker stalls, anywhere across Singapore, and I would just recommend that you dive in and try whatever takes your fancy. Very, very inexpensive compared to eating in restaurants in Singapore.
Matt, we will speak again. Thanks very much indeed for your time, and thank you for getting us ready for the ITS World Congress by giving us an idea of the location. Matt, we'll talk again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
So if that hasn't got you excited about heading to Singapore, well, maybe our next chat will. Don't forget to join me again for another preview soon as we count down to Congress 2019. And don't forget to join me every day from the event. Whether you're there or not, there'll be plenty to hear. Thanks again to HERE, Swarco, PTV, WSP, AGD, Jenoptik and Cohda Wireless. And we'll chat again soon on Talking Transport.
Talking Transport is produced and presented by Paul Hutton for the Transport Network suite of products.